US President-elect Donald Trump has called for his nation to take over Greenland. He wants the Danish territory to become part of his nation, offering to buy the island. But if Trump doesn't get his way, he won't rule out using economic or even military coercion to take it over. Part of the president-elect's reasoning is that the world's largest island is becoming ever more strategically important. It has a ton of resources, including rare earth metals, uranium, oil, and gas. The total worth of these resources is unknown, but it is in the trillions of dollars. Especially rare earth metals are going to be vital for the future, as they are in demand in new generation industries. Also, Greenland sits right next to some of the most important waterways globally, and its position will only become more important. The Arctic region is slowly melting and becoming accessible to trade, and the trade routes that open up run very closely past Greenland. There is also a military buildup in the Arctic between mainly the US and Russia. The US already has an airbase in Greenland, but it needs to get more bases there to keep up with Russia's expansion into the Arctic. In this video, we'll take a deep dive into the complex and heated politics of Trump's proposed takeover. We'll also take a look at why Greenland could become the most strategic territory of the United States in the 21st century, if Trump's plans succeed. But before we get started, please hit that like button down below to support our channel. And without further ado, let's get into the video. Now, to understand Greenland, we first need to take a step back and look at its history. The largest island in the world wound up being part of the Danish kingdom, with its capital of Copenhagen, 2,200 miles or about 3,500 kilometers apart from Greenland's administrative center of Nuuk. This can be traced back to 1721, when the Denmark-Norway Union officially colonized the island. Scandinavian Vikings had already settled in the land back in the 10th century during their exploration of the Faroe Islands, Iceland, Greenland, and even parts of North America. They disappeared from Greenland in the 15th century, partially because of conflict with the Inuits. Fun fact, the Norse were the first to settle southern Greenland, and the Inuits only arrived later. People often seem to think that the Scandinavians are the colonizers taking Greenland from the locals, but that's not really the full story, although there has been mistreatment of Inuits under European rule. Anyway, during the 18th century, the Europeans were back for good, which coincided with the emergence of global trade networks. Back at home, Norway got in trouble with Sweden in the 19th century, and that's why it was forced to leave the union with Denmark in 1814. This left Denmark with control over the three territories of Greenland, Iceland, and the Faroe Islands. This remained the case for years. The overseas territories weren't that important economically, as their most significant industry was fishing. They have always relied on subsidies from Denmark to keep afloat, which Copenhagen only provided out of strategic reasons. In the 20th century, Denmark slowly started to let go of the islands, though. In 1918, Iceland became a sovereign state in a personal union with Denmark, and it gained full independence during World War II. The Faroe Islands got home rule in 1948, meaning that it could decide about domestic issues, but it was still a part of Denmark. With Greenland, the process went a bit slower. In 1953, Greenland's status was upgraded from a colony to an integral part of Denmark, and the island got 2 representatives in the Danish parliament. It was only in 1979 that Greenland got home rule, similar to the Faroe Islands 3 decades earlier. In 2009, its rights were expanded, and Greenland got self-governance. Most of Greenland's matters are now decided in its parliament in Nuuk. You can compare it to a municipal government because there are just 31 representatives governing a population of about 56,000. Also, their legislative power is limited. To this day, Denmark decides about foreign policy, defense, and certain economic matters. But the people in Greenland can't really complain, as Denmark provides them with almost $600 million a year in subsidies. That's about $10,000 per person in Greenland, or about 30% of their income. The key takeaway from all of this is that Denmark sees Greenland as an important part of its kingdom. It has governed and supported the island for centuries, starting before the US was even a thing. And that's why Trump's takeover proposals have sent shockwaves throughout the world. Denmark is trying to stay diplomatic, saying that Greenland can decide about its own future and that it's unlikely it will become a US state. Danish officials have also stated that they're open to talks about more cooperation with the US. The country's prime minister even said that the US is Denmark's closest partner and that it's only natural that Trump is thinking about Greenland and the Arctic. But behind closed doors, they're probably panicking right now, due to the sheer assertiveness of Trump. In one press conference, he has said he can't rule out military force or economic coercion. He's willing to use tariffs to force Denmark to concede, saying that he would tariff Denmark at a very high level. Most people can't imagine it ever gets to that because Denmark is a NATO ally and a EU member. But Trump doesn't really see Denmark as a legitimate power in Greenland, as he claimed that nobody even knows if they have any right, title, or interest. But saying this stuff is making other world leaders concerned, or even angry. The German chancellor said that the principle of the inviolability of borders applies to every country, no matter whether it's a very small one or a very powerful one. The French foreign minister said that there's obviously no question that the European Union would let other nations of the world attack its sovereign borders. Ironically, Denmark announced a $1.5 billion defense upgrade in Greenland, just hours after Trump's statements. They say that this was an irony of fate, but they could have planned this beforehand. The package includes upgrades to the airports to handle F-35s, new drones, and new vessels. Denmark's defense minister said that we have not invested enough in the Arctic for many years. Now we are planning a stronger presence, he said. Another supposedly unrelated event was Donald Trump Jr.'s private visit to the country, while his father was making all of these comments. He said that he just loved going there and that it wasn't to make some sort of deal. But it was a huge PR thing to have a Trump plane landing in Greenland right in the midst of the debate. Trump Jr. talked to local residents about his father's proposals, garnering support among the relatively small community. However, critics say it was staged to make it seem like Greenlanders supported Trump and wanted to become part of the US. Back in Greenland, public opinion is mixed. It's not clear what people actually want. The country's prime minister said that we are not for sale. But it's a complicated situation, as Greenland is trying to separate itself from Denmark at the same time. The ruling party is pro-independence, and Greenland's leader is using the publicity to once again focus on the issue. He said that Greenland should free itself from the shackles of colonialism. Greenland has an 89% Inuit population, and they feel wronged by Denmark. In the 1950s, they took children from Inuit families to Denmark in order to make them assimilate. Later, the Danish authorities also pushed for involuntary birth control. That's all being recognized nowadays, but the Inuits in Greenland are still upset. After the election this year in April, there could be major steps forward creating an independent state, as per the Prime Minister. But notice the word independent there. The government in Greenland is showing no interest in actually becoming a US state. In one of the messages to his people, Greenland's Prime Minister said that while others, including Danes and Americans, are entitled to their opinions, we should not be caught up in the hysteria and external pressures distracting us from our path. Just like Denmark, Greenland's government is only making polite diplomatic statements. Officials said they're looking forward to establishing contact with Trump, and that they're ready to work together on security stability in the Arctic. Right now, opinions in Greenland are mixed about Trump's rhetoric. Some criticize his aggressive language and point out that they want to be independent from Denmark, but also the United States. Others see a massive opportunity in cooperation with the US. However, it won't be surprising if Greenland flips 180 degrees and that accession talks with the US suddenly become very serious. That's because the US can pay the people of Greenland royally for the deal. There are only 56,000 people on the island, so for $5.6 billion, you can give everyone $100,000. And that's peanuts considering how much Greenland is worth. So the US could give even more. Denmark also wants to be compensated, as it has invested into Greenland for hundreds of years. However, with the rise of Greenland's independent movement, it's not guaranteed whether Denmark gets any monetary compensation. Greenland can just hold a referendum and leave the Danish kingdom, or even join the US on its own accord. In the latter scenario, Greenland gets the money, while Denmark is left in the dust. Another incentive for Greenland is that the country desperately needs investment and security partners. Back in Europe, it seems like they don't even have the money to invest in Greenland's industry. Greenland has also tried to get Chinese investment, but that was a big red line for the US. Getting too close with China is a quick way for the government in Greenland to guarantee a US invasion. So that just leaves one major investment partner left, namely the states themselves. Due to its geographic location and its economic might, the US can easily replace Denmark as Greenland's biggest economic partner. Still, it seems strange to buy a new territory, but we should point out that deals like this have happened before. The US was quite literally built by buying lands from other colonial powers. During the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, the US bought 828,000 square miles from France, doubling its land at the time. And nowadays, 15 US states owe their whole or part of their territory to this deal. Florida was bought from Spain in 1819. Parts of Arizona and New Mexico were bought from Mexico in 1854. Alaska is also an example of this, as it was bought from Russia in 1867. If Greenland is acquired and becomes the 51st state, it would fit perfectly into this list. The political system of the US is also designed to make this easier. The US has a lot of freedoms for individual member states, and the federal government is very small, or at least it was intended to be. This fits in perfectly with Greenland's desire for independence and the preservation of its culture. Now we understand some of the politics behind this deal. Let's move on to the why. We already hinted at some of these things earlier, but there are a lot of reasons why Trump is so obsessed with Greenland. As a matter of fact, if he manages to acquire Greenland, it will be a game changer for the rest of the century. One huge factor is the resource value of Greenland. This includes traditional resources like oil and natural gas. It's not fully known how much the island and its surrounding seas contain because it's simply not fully explored yet because of the country's inhospitable conditions. But one estimate said it has up to 17.5 billion barrels of oil and 148 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. It could be even more, putting the value of this in the trillions. Now, Greenland recently stopped its programs for developing the oil and gas sector, saying that it wants to fight climate change. It's pretty odd coming from Greenland, though, because climate change would be a dream come true for the island. If the ice melts, more of the island's resources become accessible. Historically, this was the main reason why Greenland's oil and gas remained untapped. But oil and gas is not even the most important resource. Greenland has one of the largest reserves of rare earth metals on Earth. They are elements that are used in many modern technologies, such as cell phones and computers, but also in batteries. Without rare earth metals, you also can't create renewable energy sources. They're critical for wind turbines and solar panels, but also for electric vehicles. Right now, China is a dominant player in the rare earths market, which is a big vulnerability to the US. It's worth noting that Denmark is simply too small to build up the mining industries in Greenland, and the EU also hasn't been able to provide enough capital to develop this crucial industry. However, the US has more than enough companies and investors ready to jumpstart production. It is very likely that these people are talking to Trump behind the scenes about the possibilities that this could bring. This is all very important, as these resources could add a lot to the US economy. But it's not the biggest reason for acquiring Greenland. We also have to take into account Greenland's crucial position in global trade networks over the coming decades. You see, the Arctic Ocean is becoming more and more accessible to ships due to the melting ice caps. NASA data indicated that it's shrinking by more than 12% per decade. For shipping companies, that's great news. It opens up brand new trade routes through the Arctic that could circumvent other routes through the Panama Canal, the Suez Canal, or the Malacca Strait. It would revolutionize trade between North America, Asia, and Europe. To be precise, there are 3 shipping routes in the Arctic. There's one next to Canada called the Northwest Passage, one in the middle called the Trans-Arctic Shipping Route, and one next to Russia called the Northern Sea Route. The middle one is not accessible at all yet, because it would require the ice caps to basically disappear. But Russia's Northern Sea Route is already in use. It uses the shipping route to transport LNG, mostly to China nowadays. Putin issued a presidential decree in 2018, saying that the Northern Sea Route should become a global transport route. By 2030, the Russian authorities want to ship more than 190 million tons of cargo through the route. Last year, it has already reached about 40 million tons. China is also interested in Arctic shipping, as it started a project called the Polar Silk Road. This would allow China to reach Europe and North America much faster. It would cut the journey from Shanghai to Europe's port of Rotterdam by more than 30%. The same goes for the US. If the Arctic Ocean opens up, it will be vital for US trade overseas. It could also be used for trade between the East Coast and the West Coast, as it's a bit shorter than the route through the Panama Canal. The thing is, Greenland is right next to these sea routes. The US wants to protect its future trade interests, and controlling Greenland will give it a clear advantage in the region. The same goes for Canada, which Trump has also talked about integrating into the US. It seems like a less serious proposal, but closer cooperation with Canada is certainly necessary in this new situation. The Northwest Passage goes through Canada's exclusive economic zone, giving it the right to bar ships from using it. But the US obviously wants access for its shipping companies. And last but not least, there's also a huge military aspect to this. The Arctic is increasingly becoming the next geopolitical battleground, with NATO, Russia, and to a lesser extent, China all getting involved. Trump has made multiple comments about this, and it's something he cares about deeply. At one press conference, he said, "We need Greenland for national security purposes." On the Truth Social platform, he stated that for purposes of national security and freedom throughout the world, the United States of America feels that the ownership and control of Greenland is an absolute necessity. Well, it won't be the first time the US invades someone to bring freedom, but there's no denying that Greenland is vital for US national security. Currently, the US operates the Bidufik space base in Greenland. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Formerly known as the Thule Air Base. It was built in the Cold War, and it has a radar, a ballistic missile early warning system, an airfield, and a deep water port. Back when the US was negotiating with Denmark, Harry Truman even offered to buy the whole island for $100 million, about $1 billion in today's money. Denmark refused this, but it just shows how important Greenland was during the Cold War. And this all makes a lot of sense, because Greenland is actually very close to Russia, or the former Soviet Union. There are many problems with the traditional Mercator projection map, and one of them is that it doesn't give a good picture of the Arctic. Only if you look at the globe from the north, you'll see that Greenland is only 1,200 miles, or about 1,900 kilometers, from Russia. During the Cold War, the Arctic was one of the main frontiers between NATO and the Soviet Union. A missile or submarine attack on North America would probably come from this area. Combined, the US and Canada started the NORAD military organization to defend the continent against incoming Soviet attacks. Among other things, they tried to bar Russia from entering the Atlantic Ocean by monitoring and defending the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap, also known as the GIUK gap. The Thule Air Base was a vital component of this. After the Cold War ended, though, most of the US and Soviet bases were abandoned, and there was no strategic interest in the Arctic anymore. But over the last 2 decades or so, this has changed radically. Russia started to renovate hundreds of old Soviet bases, and it even built new ones in the region. Since 2014, it has built over 475 new military structures. The United States is also once again investing in bases in Greenland, and the NATO alliance is upgrading its military presence in the Arctic. But it seems like the Russian military is ahead. According to experts, the West's military footprint in the region lags behind 10 years to the Russian one. As you can see on this map, Russia operates way more military bases within the circle than all other NATO members combined. In total, it outnumbers the alliance by a third. This is all going according to Moscow's plan. In Russia's 2022 Maritime Doctrine document, it says that the Arctic is its most important maritime direction. Russia will protect these waters by all means. But the question is whether Russia's military presence in the region is solely for defensive purposes. Putin wants to re-establish Russia as a global power, and the Arctic seems like the perfect place to start. Its northern fleet is the strongest navy in the area, with 16 deep water ports, 25 conventional and nuclear submarines, and 20 surface vessels. 8 of the submarines are capable of launching long-range nuclear missiles. Most of them are located on the Kola Peninsula, right next to Norway. Seeing this threat, Trump thinks that he needs to act now. Under Denmark, Greenland can't contribute much to the NATO alliance, as Copenhagen's defense spending is very limited, but the US can contribute much more to Greenland's defense. It can turn Greenland into a floating fortress, protecting it from Russian attacks and using it to curb Russia's influence in the Arctic. All in all, there are a lot of reasons why Trump feels like buying Greenland is essential for the US. It would be a hard thing to pull off, but who knows what he can do in his presidential term. After all, he's the businessman who knows everything about the art of the deal. All right, if you want to keep getting updated on topics like these, please subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching.